Well, welcome everybody. We're so glad you're here. If you're just joining us, we're in this series that's called Goliath Must Fall, and we've in the last few weeks have been talking about the different giants in our life that ultimately are out to call you worthless, to bang you down, to demoralize you, and ultimately to steal the glory of God. And so what we know, and that's why we're doing this series, is that you and I, we need to battle this. We need to defeat this. We need to conquer these giants. And last week, if you were here, Dom talked us through this giant of fear. And I just want to say this, and I'm giving you permission right now, but he did an excellent job of the 4 steps that you can take to conquer the giant of fear. But the cool thing about the 4 steps he gave, they apply towards every single giant that we're going to talk about, or giants we're not going to talk about. So I give you permission, go into the men's app, click on the Goliath Must Fall banner, scroll down, click session 2. Right below the memory verse of the notes from last week are those 4 steps. Identify, pray, promise, and share are those 4 things. Those are the steps. I'm giving you the punchline right now. Those are the steps that apply to defeat any giant. But that's not going to stop us from talking about our giant today. And the giant we have today is the giant of rejection. It's interesting. There was a study done, and they asked people, have you experienced rejection in your life? And a whopping 95% of the people responded, I have experienced rejection at some point in my life. And that tells me a couple things. Number one, the question was probably wrong or not understood, or they didn't read it and they didn't answer it, because the other 5% had to have lied about it. Because what I know is that each and every one of us in some way, some form, has experienced rejection in our lives. Some of you may have been on a job interview, and maybe you can relate, maybe you can't. But you were on a job interview and you did not get the job. You realize that that's rejection. Maybe you tried out for that sports team and you wanted to be on a specific team in a specific sport, but you didn't make the tryouts. That's rejection. Maybe you asked the girl and she said, hell no. Okay? Yeah? Yeah, that's you? Okay. Yeah. That's rejection. Rejection itself isn't really a bad thing. We all experience it. It's part of our life, but it's not a bad thing in itself. What the differentiator and what we're going to talk about today is this. It's the way in which you react to that rejection. The things you do and how you do it when rejection comes in your life. So today, we're going to talk through a couple examples based on my experience. Because trust me, I've had more rejection, I think, in my life than maybe a couple of you combined. And I'm judging there because I don't know what you've been through, but it feels like, as I was preparing for this, that the amount of rejection just seemed to be overwhelming to me. So let's do this. Let's talk about the way, whoops, wrong button, the way in which we respond to rejection. And the first one is this: we act on it. This is a situation. Rejection happens in our life, and we immediately do something about it. Rejection happens, and there's an action that takes place, usually in emotion. It's usually fueled by something that maybe isn't us in the right state of mind, but the rejection happens and we do something as a result. The example I give, and this is really a hard one for me because I don't talk about this very much. I am a pretty transparent person if you know me, but this is one area that I very seldom talk about, but I think it illustrates the point very well. I'm back in college. It was my first year in college, freshman. I had been dating this lovely young lady for about 3.5 years at this point. We were at college together. We obviously were in high school prior to that. And I envisioned a life with this young lady. I envisioned having children with her. I saw my life growing old with this young lady. And it was about Christmas time she came up to me and said the words that I don't think any guy ever wants to hear. I don't love you. And in the moment, my world just crashed. Tremendous depression. So much so that I attempted to take my own life. Because I was going to show her. And I was going to hide from the pain. I was going to take care of that. The rejection happened, and my response was immediate, and unfortunately probably not the right decision. The good news, in case you were wondering, and I can laugh about this now, by the way, the good news is I was not successful. So, in case you were wondering. Yeah, right. We act on it. Next, we stay in it. So the rejection happens, and for a long period of time. It may be a season, it may be your entire life, but for a long period of time, you stay in the rejection. For me, the example that I give, and this is really a weird example, and I apologize in advance, but bear with me. I am in 4th grade. And if you were born in Arizona, this probably relate to this. But my mom took me to shopping all the time, and we went to a store called Smitty's. I don't think it exists anymore, but if you were around Arizona, it was kind of the super Walmart before there was such a thing, right? I mean, they not only did they have the food, but they had electronics and clothes and everything else. It was super Walmart before super Walmart. So it was a big place. But what I loved about going shopping with my mom is in the electronics section, they had a game console. I didn't have one at home, and I'm in 4th grade, so this is, the 80s, late 70s, I don't remember, early 80s. And at the time in television, game console was a big deal. So I'd say, oh yeah, I'll go with you, Mom. I'll go with you to the store anytime you want me to, because I'm sitting playing that game. My mom went and did the shopping. She came back and said, okay, Dan, we're ready to go. I said, okay, Mom. I continued to play, because what I heard is this. She has to walk from the electronics department up to the checkout. It was always a busy store, so there's always people in line, so she's going to have to wait in line. Then she's going to have to check out all that stuff that she's buying. So I got a good few minutes here. I can continue to play. Time escaped me. I have no idea how long it took, but all of a sudden I realized, I need to be somewhere. So I put it down, and I go up front, and there is not a soul in line. My mom isn't anywhere to be found. I went outside, looked for the car. I didn't see the car. I went back inside, and I went aisle by aisle, row by row, looking for Mom. Eventually, and my mom says this was about 35 minutes later, which doesn't seem like a lot, but for her it was a ton. She comes in, and I see her, and I approach her, and she says these words to me. You dumb kid. You dumb kid. I knew I was in trouble, but those words to me didn't fit the situation. So in my analytical mind as a 4th grader, I took that rejection, because I felt I was being rejected by my mom, because I had never, ever heard anything like that come out of her mouth. But I took those words, and I internalized them, and I have stayed in that mindset of those words, you dumb kid. Even to this day, I struggle. In full transparency, I struggle with this concept of dumbness. I never want to be or say anything stupid. I don't want anybody to ever call me dumb. I realize I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I am not dumb. The rejection happened, and I've stayed in that my entire life. The next method is we ignore it. We ignore it. Rejection happens, we take the punch, and we're on. And we move on to the next thing. What I find interesting about this particular example, and at least in my experience, is this. We may ignore it, but that punch that we take still has a little sting. It still has a little piece of us. We may not show it on the outside. We may never even articulate it to anybody. No one may never, ever know what we're feeling, but we move on, and the punch is taken. The example I give here is I had an interview. We were in Southern California. This is probably 25 years ago, but we were in Southern California. I had a job interview in Kansas City, Missouri. And I went to Kansas City and to interview with this company. It was a telecom company that was kind of just ramping up. And it was one of those situations where the job description was written for me. Everything about that job said, boy, that is perfect for Dan. Everything. I had a very unique skill set, and it fit in perfectly. I went there, I did the interview. I love the people. I love the facility. I love the company. I thought, this is going to be great. We're going to move to Kansas City. I don't think I ever said that out loud. It sounds funny now that I hear myself say it. Okay, but we're moving to Kansas City. Fly home. It was about 4 or 5 days later, I see the job posting again online. And I called the headhunter. I said, is there something you're not telling me? And he said, yeah, they are going to go a different direction. I said, okay, fine. And I kept going. But even to this day, I still ask myself the question, that job was perfect for me. Why didn't they hire me? But I just went on, and life went on. I knew that that was just what was going to happen. I ignored it and moved on. What I find really interesting is I was talking to my wife about this. She had no clue it had any impact on me. But she did say this. She said, do you realize that you only had one interview after that one in your life? It had an impact. I ignored it, but there was a slight punch. There was a slight feeling. There was an impact it had on me. And the last one is restore it. This is probably the most dangerous in some respects, because the rejection happens and we store it, and at some point it comes out, and it comes out in amazing and bad ways. For me, and I've told this story, so I apologize if it's old, but it just applies here. But if you know anything about my mom and dad, my mom and dad separated multiple times during our life, ultimately ending in a divorce. He was an absentee father. He would always prefer to be either at the bar with his workmates or someplace other than with his family. And eventually he came home after the divorce to live with us because they gave him 6 months to live. He only lasted 6 weeks. And so he eventually died. And when I think about my rejection that I received from my dad, it was non-stop rejection. Every aspect of his life was rejecting us. And it got to a point early on where, and I can't speak for my brothers and sisters, but for me, it was just, I became callous. So much so that at his funeral, I didn't have any emotion at all. No emotion. And it happened to be finals week. I was a freshman in high school at the time. It happened to be finals week. And so I just kind of just jumped into what I was doing and just didn't deal with the situation. But looking back now, I realize I stored it all up. Fast forward, a few years. Now I have a family of 3, a wife, a mortgage, car payment, the typical American dream. And all of a sudden in my life, things started breaking down. Sin started entering in my life. I started damaging my kids. I started impacting my wife. Because all this emotion that I haven't dealt with, all the rejection that I felt from my father was starting to come out as I was now a father and found myself doing the same things that he was doing. And it almost destroyed our family. So those are the 4 ways in which we deal with rejection. And the one thing I know about all 4 of those, in all those cases, is that giant of rejection was standing right in front of me in every single situation. It was demoralizing me. It was telling me I'm worthless, and ultimately stealing the glory of God. Stealing the goodness and the fullness of life that God wanted for me. As I was reflecting on this, one thing was crystal clear in every single example, and there were plenty more. But in every scenario, I realized something, is that in my, looking into this, I was seeking approval from everyone else in an earthly realm. I was looking for approval from everybody else that was around me. And never once did I look up. And looking back, I needed that perspective. I put your memory verse, should be on your chart. If not, I'm just going to read it for you. We're going to go to Jesus' baptism in Matthew 3, starting with the 16th verse. It says this: as soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. Verse 17, and a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." I hope you hear in the text what God is giving to Jesus in this moment. He is giving his approval to Jesus. What's cool about this is that when you and I are baptized, when you and I are asking Christ into our heart, and we're receiving the Holy Spirit, you realize that you and I get the same approval. The beauty is that through Jesus, you have been accepted as you are, as is. Nothing more, nothing less. As is. Do you think that concept, you think that feeling can conquer a giant? The reason I know this is that if you look at Jesus' life, and you look at when that approval came in his life, do you realize that it was before his ministry? It was before he turned water into wine, my personal favorite. It was before he healed the blind man. It was before he fed thousands with very little. And get this, it was before he was rejected by his own people. And yes, it was before he was nailed to a cross. That approval is available to you and I. When I think about my rejection, I viewed everything that I did in those moments through the lens of the world. Because I was looking at the world for approval, the lens was a worldly lens. But once I stepped back and looked at this, and I took off the lens of the world and I put on the lens of the cross, it changed everything. When I look back, that girl, if she wouldn't have broken up with me, I would have never met my wife. And I know I've said this multiple times, and maybe I'm saying it so I can hear it, so I believe it, but I honestly feel I do believe it, is that we've been married for 30 years. We have 3 kids. We have 2 beautiful and wonderful grandkids. But I love that lady more today than I ever have in my life. God's plan was for Veronica and I to be together. When I look back at the dumb comment, I talked to my mom about this. This was 4 or 5 years ago. She doesn't even remember it. The words to her had no meaning. She just had nothing. She didn't know what to say, is the way I interpret it now. But did I ever talk to her about it? Did I ever early on so that it didn't affect me? What I find really interesting, and my mom is one of the most astute people I know, but she said, do you realize that it was at that time that you went from C's to A's? I'm just saying, if you need to call your children dumb, maybe I don't know. No, don't do that. Don't do that. When I think about the Kansas interview, what I didn't know until just recently is that just a few years later, that company went bankrupt. I still don't know I didn't get the job, though. But I know that one interview that I had was with a small little company called Intel. And I'm just telling you, my life would not be what it is today without a company like Intel that I've invested in and has vested in me. And then lastly, the story of my father. This one's a little harder, but I was in a room exactly like this about 12 years ago. We're going through men's fraternity where we're unpacking the father wounds. And it was through this place that helped me get from here to my father's grave to have a conversation with him and ask him for forgiveness. And forgive him. Because I wasn't a good kid, but he also wasn't the greatest dad. I knew he loved me, but he sure didn't show it. But it took this place getting me to that place. And to be honest, I don't know if all that stuff had happened if I wouldn't be in front of you today. God had a plan. And I know that craziness happens, but he's got a plan and he is orchestrating it. And when we put on the lens of the cross, the story becomes clear. So guys, I'm telling you, these giants are there to beat you down, to demoralize you, and to steal God's glory. But I'm telling you, Jesus did not suffer on that cross because you're worthless. He suffered on that cross because God orchestrated it all because you are all special. And he loves you guys to pieces. So how do we defeat it? How do we stop it? How do we conquer it? You're going to hate me for the answer, but we don't. And the reason is Jesus already did. When we take off the lens of the world and we put the lens of the cross, I hope you guys realize that that giant, whatever that giant is, has been defeated. But it takes you seeing that and taking that step forward to make sure you have the right pair of glasses on. And with that, just always remember that Jesus was rejected first. So you're in pretty good company. Amen. Yeah. You guys have some discussion questions on there. You have some homework. Let me just pray real quick, let you have the time, and thank you so much for putting up with me. Heavenly Father, we just thank you. We thank you so much for this message and really this whole series as we realize that there are things that are outside our control that are trying to separate us from you. So Father, I'm just going to ask you, that you help us eliminate the giants and realize that those giants have been defeated once we put the lens of the cross. Father, we love you and we appreciate everything and all the sacrifices you made, and we realize that you just want the absolute best for us so that we can expand your kingdom, so that we can glorify you, so that we can put you first in everything we do. And so I pray for this time as we talk about this topic, and I pray for that transparency, that honesty, and that presence that only you can give as we unpack the fear or the giant of rejection. We just pray this in your holy and gracious name. Amen.